When, where, and how?
The death of Aurangzeb in 1707 is usually considered to mark the beginning of modern period in India's history. Some of the European countries colonized large parts of the world. The modern period saw the decline of Mughal Empire and the rise of number of small and big independent states. The British established a foothold in India, and from about the middle of the 18th century, Britain's conquest of India began. Within a few decades, the entire country came under the direct or indirect rule of the British. Various social, religious, cultural, and intellectual movements took root, which aimed at removing the state of stagnation of Indian society. Abundant source of material is available for the modern period. Many biographies were written during the period under study. The invention of the printing press resulted in mass printing of newspapers and magazines. They were circulated in Hindi and many other regional languages. They gave us interesting and useful glimpse into the history of the 18th and early 19th centuries. Photographs, films, and radio broadcasts are available which are useful in reconstructing history. Many paintings were made which depicted the people and their conditions during the period under study. Official records and documents are also very significant. Many monuments were built during the British rule. They constitute archaeological evidence. The accounts of the people who were alive during the time of the freedom struggle are very important sources.
Rural life under the British rule. The British were firmly established in India, and their main interest lay in the maximization of their profits. The East India Company turned its attention towards agriculture, which was the chief source of income. It experimented with many different policies. All the policies introduced by them were intended to increase profits, even though they involved the oppression of the peasants. The East India had the responsibility of collecting revenue. Now, the zamindars deposited the money to the corrupt officers of the East India Company. Later, 3 kinds of land revenue were introduced by the British in India: the permanent settlement, Mehelwari settlement, and the Ryotwari system. The revenue policies of the British turned the rural economy upside down. The conditions of the peasants became miserable, and there were no welfare measures to give them any relief. Commercialization of agriculture was yet another result of British economic policies in India. This was largely responsible for many of the famines that took place during this period. The exploitation by the colonial rulers led to many revolts by the peasants who had to bear many adversities. The Indigo Revolt was a peasant uprising in Bengal in 1859. The Indigo Commission was appointed for investigation. They made several recommendations, but still the problems could not be solved. Colonialism and tribal societies. Tribal communities are found throughout India, but many are found concentrated in hilly or forested areas. Each tribe had its distinct way of making a living. Example: hunting, gathering, herding and rearing, settled agriculture or shifting agriculture. The life of the tribal people was disturbed by the inference of the British. They challenged the traditional land rights of the tribal people. The forest policy introduced by the British affected the tribal communities radically. They participated in many revolts against the British occupation from time to time. They opposed the entry of money-lenders, revenue-collecting farmers and businessmen in their simple life. The Santhals were a simple and peaceful agrarian tribe. According to the permanent settlement introduced by the British, they lost claim on their lands and worked as tenants on the farms owned by the zamindars. The Santhals rose up in rebellion against the British authority and the corrupt zamindars. The rebellion was brutally suppressed by the British. The Munda rebellion was one of the most powerful rebellion that rocked the British rule. The annexation of the Ahom Kingdom of Assam marked the entry of the British into the northeast. The British captured all the tribal inhabited hills of the northeast by the 1870s. The tribes revolted many times, but they were suppressed.
A popular rebellion, the Revolt of 1857.
The Revolt of 1857 was a severe outburst of anger and discontent accumulated in the hearts of the Indians. Many causes cumulatively caused this revolt. There were political, economic, military, social and religious causes. Finally, the introduction of the Enfield rifles in 1856 sparked off the fire. On March 29, 1857, at Barakpur, Mangal Pandey, angered by the actions of the East India Company, refused to use the greased cartridges. He was hanged later. At Meerut, in May 1857, 85 sepoys refused to use the greased cartridge and were sentenced to long-term imprisonment. On 10th May, the sepoys broke out an open rebellion, shot their officers, released their fellow sepoys and headed towards Delhi. Delhi was seized by the rebels on May 12, 1857. The old and powerless Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah II was proclaimed the Emperor of India. Soon, the rebellion spread throughout northern and central India at Lucknow, Allahabad, Kanpur, Bareilly, Banaras, parts of Bihar, Jhansi and other places. The revolt met with some early successes but was eventually suppressed by the British within a year. Tantia Tope was put to death. Nana Sahib and Begum Hazrat Mahal fled to Nepal. Rani of Jhansi was killed on the battlefield. Many other leaders of the revolt were also dead by 1859, the year in which the British again established their authority over India. Though it had failed in its objective of defeating the British, this was the first time when Indians got together to fight against an indomitable military power. British historians have dismissed the uprising in 1857 as nothing more than a sepoy mutiny. The Indian historians termed it as the First War of Independence.
The consequences of the revolt of 1857 were very important and made an impact on the British power. The company rule came to an end and power passed on to the British Queen.
Education under the British rule. When the East India Company established itself in India, it showed very little interest in the education of the Indians. The three main agencies that were responsible for the spread of modern education in India, the foreign Christian missionaries, the British government, and progressive Indians.
The British realized that it would be advantageous to have educated Indians in administrative positions.
A controversy broke out between the Anglicists and the Orientalists on the medium of instruction. The Anglicists favored English as a medium of instruction, whereas the Orientalists were supporters of Indian languages as a medium of instruction. Lord Macaulay's minute was accepted by Lord Bentinck, and he passed the resolution to accept the English language as a medium of instruction for the Indian education system. Sir Charles Wood issued an educational declaration called Wood's Dispatch in 1854. It gave the East India Company the total responsibility for education in India. Sir Syed Ahmad established Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College in 1875. This college aimed at creating a confluence of traditional learning and modern sciences. The Swadeshi movement initiated another movement called the National Education Movement. The demand for national education became a vital part of the Swadeshi movement. Gandhiji believed in a concept of education which was called Nai Talim or New Education.
Women and caste reforms.
Social issues like sati, child marriage, widow remarriage, and education of women were taken up by social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Rai Sahib Harbilas Sarda, Swami Dayanand, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Ramabai, and many others. Due to their efforts, the Sati Abolition Act was passed in 1829 by Governor-General William Bentinck. The Widow Remarriage Act was passed in 1856, prohibiting forced widowhood. Reforms had become essential for the development of society. The educated Indians could no longer tolerate irrational and dehumanizing social practices and revolted against the rigid and outdated customs. Social reformers such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Swami Vivekananda, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, Mahadev Govind Ranade, Jyotirao Phule, and others questioned the validity of discrimination based on caste and religion. They were against the caste system, especially untouchability. They untiringly worked for the upliftment of the lower castes. Mahatma Gandhi single-handedly tried to raise people's consciousness against the ill treatment of the lower castes. Dr. Ambedkar fought for political rights and upliftment of the untouchables and the lower caste people. The Nationalist movement. After the revolt of 1857, the British continued their oppressive and repressive policies, and gradually feelings of nationalism arose in the Indians. The British continued the economic exploitation of India and introduced policies which led to further ruining of agriculture and industry in India. The educated Indians became aware of the tyranny and diplomacy of the British. They began to make the common people conscious of their rights and duties. The Indian National Congress was set up, and its first meeting was held at Bombay on December 28, 1885. The moderates had faith and believed in being loyal to the British. Their aims were moderate, and they wanted to bring about a gradual change without any revolt. Bengal was partitioned by Lord Curzon on the pretext that it was too large to govern. Actually, it was the part of the divide and rule policy. The Swadeshi and the boycott movements stemmed from the partition of Bengal. The main policy was to give up all foreign goods and use only Indian products. The Muslim League was formed on December 30th, 1906 at Dhaka. The objective of the Muslim League was to maintain friendly relations and remain loyal to the British. The 1919 reforms of Montagu-Chelmsford did not satisfy the demands of the Indians because the real power was still in the hands of the Governor-General and the Executive Council. Many secret revolutionary organizations started. Bands of young men got secret military training and they attacked the British, intending to terrorize them. Gandhi emerged as the national leader who steered the country towards freedom from British rule in the second phase of the freedom struggle. The British continued their repressive policies, and in 1919 they passed the Rowlatt Act, which gave the government the authority to arrest anyone without trial. The Congress launched the non-cooperation movement along with the Khilafat movement. In December 1929, INC adopted a resolution calling for Purna Swaraj, or complete independence from the British. Gandhi began the historic Dandi March on March 12, 1930, and broke the Salt Law. The Government of India Act was passed in 1935. According to this act, India was to become a federation. The Muslim League adopted a resolution in Lahore in 1940 called the Lahore Resolution. They demanded a separate state for the Muslims. The Congress launched the Quit India movement in August 1942. Though the Quit India movement was short-lived, it was a mass movement which demonstrated that Indians were willing to struggle and sacrifice for freedom. With the end of the Second World War, the British Prime Minister announced his government's decision to grant complete independence to India. Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy, put forward a plan on June 3, 1947, which provided for the division of India into the Indian Union and Pakistan. At midnight on August 15, 1947, India gained its independence and Pakistan was created. Resources.
Resources are of utmost importance to us. These resources are of various types. Resources can be defined as all those features present in the environment that help us satisfy our needs. Resources usually refer to the natural resources which occur in the air, water, or on the land. There are some resources which are self-generating, inexhaustible, and there are others which are not exhaustible. Natural resources can be classified on the basis of 1. Level of development and use, which can be further divided into actual resources and potential resources. Second, origin, which can be further divided into abiotic resources and biotic resources. 3. Stock, which can be further divided into renewable resources and non-renewable resources. And 4. Distribution, which can be further divided into ubiquitous resources and localized resources. The demand for using natural resources is growing at an alarming rate. This is because of the increasing population growth, economic development, increasing wealth, and technological advances in many countries. Technological advances in various countries have enabled people to discover new uses of existing natural resources, extract more and more natural resources, and find out new resources as well.
Natural resources, land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife. Natural resources are given to us by nature. Land, air, soil, water, minerals, natural vegetation and wildlife are some examples of natural resources.
Land is very important to us. Land is needed for settlements, agriculture, industries, commerce, transport, and recreation. We have to find ways to increase the supply of usable land as well as to make better use of the existing usable land. We can increase our land supply through land reclamation by restoring derelict land, draining swamps, and creating new land by landfill methods. We can make better use of existing land by terracing, irrigation, and by using fertilizers. Land degradation is the decline in the productivity of cultivated land or forest land. Soil is the upper cover of the earth's surface, which is formed by the breaking up of the parent rock and the addition of water, humus, etc. The factors affecting soil formation are parent rock, relief, climate, flora and fauna, and time. Alluvial soil, red soil, laterite soil, and black soil are the main 4 types of soil. Various techniques can be used to prevent soil erosion. Example: terracing, contour farming, crop rotation, afforestation, mulching, etc. Water is another precious resource. The total amount of fresh water available for use is only 1%. Water pollution is the contamination of water by sewage, toxic chemicals, etc. Water should be conserved. Rainwater harvesting is one such way. Natural vegetation and wildlife are very important natural resources. The major vegetation types of the world are forests, grasslands, desert vegetation, and tundra vegetation. The principal types of natural vegetation in India are tropical evergreen forests, tropical deciduous forests, dry deciduous forests, thorn forests, tidal or mangrove forests, and mountain forests.
By planting trees, protecting forests from fires, generating public awareness, discouraging the practice of shifting cultivation, restricting quarrying and mining, and encouraging awareness programs like social forestry, forests can be conserved.
Distribution of wildlife to a large extent depends upon the vegetation growing there. Setting up of national parks, biosphere reserves, and wildlife sanctuaries help in conserving wildlife. Agriculture. There are three types of agricultural systems: subsistence agriculture, collective agriculture, and commercial agriculture. Subsistence agriculture can be further classified as intensive subsistence agriculture and primitive subsistence agriculture. Primitive subsistence agriculture includes shifting agriculture and nomadic herding. In collective agriculture, holdings of several farmers are run as a joint enterprise.
Commercial agriculture includes commercial grain farming, mixed farming, plantation agriculture, market gardening, and pastoral farming.
Agriculture may be viewed as a system of inputs, processes, and outputs. Major food crops are rice, wheat, maize, and millets. Jute, flax, and cotton are fiber crops, and tea and coffee are examples of beverages. To meet the increasing demand for food, agricultural development is required. Industries. The word industry refers to any economic activity concerned with the processing of raw materials into finished products with the help of machines in factories. Industries can be divided into three main types: primary industries, secondary industries, and tertiary industries. Based on raw materials used, industries can be agro-based, mineral-based, forest-based, or marine-based. Industries can be cottage industries, small-scale industries, or large-scale industries, depending upon the capital invested, number of workers employed, and volume of goods produced. Industries can also be classified into private sector, public sector, joint sector, and cooperative sector industries. The factors affecting the location of industries are raw materials, power, land, capital or finance, labor, transport, market, and government policy. The major industrial regions of the world are eastern part of North America, Western and Central Europe, UK, Italy, France, Sweden and Germany, Eastern Europe, Russia and Ukraine, and Eastern Asia, Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, China, India and Taiwan. The industrial regions of India are Mumbai, Pune cluster, Bengaluru, Tamil Nadu region, Hooghly region, Ahmedabad, Vadodara region, Chota Nagpur industrial belt, Vishakhapatnam, Guntur belt, Gurgaon, Delhi Meerut region, and Kollam, Thiruvananthapuram industrial cluster. The Tata Iron and Steel Company Limited, TISCO, was established at Sakchi, Jamshedpur in 1907 by Jamsetji Tata. The Pittsburgh region in USA is the leading center of iron and steel industry. Ahmedabad in Gujarat has become the second largest textile city of India after Mumbai. Osaka is an important textile center of Japan. The major hubs of the information technology industry are the Silicon Valley, California, and Bengaluru, India. Human resources. Population is the country's greatest resource. The population of the world is not evenly distributed. Some areas are densely populated, some are moderately populated, while some are sparsely populated. Relief, soil, climate, natural resources, accessibility, water availability, social, cultural and economic factors affect the distribution of population. Population growth is the increase in a country's population during a time, usually 1 year. It reflects the number of births and deaths during that period and the number of people migrating to and from a country. Population composition refers to the structure of the population. Some of the components of population composition are life expectancy, dependency ratio, age, sex ratio, and literacy. Our Constitution.
A written document containing the rules and principles on the basis of which a country is governed is called its constitution. A constitution defines the kind of government a country has, describes the principles to be followed in the governance of the country, lays down the power of the organs of the government, and sets out the rights of the citizens. The Indian Constitution, drafted by the Constituent Assembly, came into force on 26th January 1950. The preamble to the Constitution sets out the ideals that should guide the nation. It declares that India is a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic that aims to provide justice, liberty, and equality to all its citizens and to promote brotherhood among them. India has a federal system with the central government to take care of national affairs and state governments to take care of the states. It is a parliamentary democracy in which the people's representatives are chosen by universal adult suffrage. The powers of the government are divided among the legislature, executive, and judiciary in such a way as to prevent the misuse of power. Our fundamental rights are the right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural and educational rights, right to constitutional remedies, and right to primary education. The directive principles of state policy are guidelines or goals for the future. Only when a directive principle becomes a law can it be enforced by a court of law. The duties that citizens have towards the nation are called fundamental duties.
Understanding secularism. In a secular country, the state is not aligned to any religion. People of all religious faiths have equal rights and the freedom to practice their religion. There are no religious activities or teaching in state-run institutions. In India, the state may prohibit religious practices if they violate the rights and freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. India also relaxes laws to allow people the freedom to practice their religion. The aim of secularism is to prevent A. One religious community from dominating another, B. Sections within a community from dominating others, and C. The state from interfering in religious freedom. The Union Legislature and Executive. The Union Legislature or Parliament comprises the President, the Rajya Sabha RS and the Lok Sabha LS. At present, the strength of the LS is 545, out of which 2 members are nominated from among the Anglo-Indian community by the President. The rest are elected. LS elections are held every 5 years. The state and UTs are divided into constituencies on the basis of population. Each constituency elects 1 member of the LS. To stand for elections, a person must be a citizen who is not less than 25, of sound mind, and not a salaried government employee. The party that wins the majority, at least 272 of seats, is invited by the President to form the Union Government or the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. A coalition government is formed by 2 or more parties when no single party has the required majority. The RS has 238 elected members and 12 nominated members. Unlike the LS, the RS is a permanent body that cannot be dissolved. Its members are elected by the elected members of the state assemblies, not by the people directly, for 6 years, and 1/3 of them retire every 2 years. There are differences between the LS and the RS in the matter of powers too. Only the LS can pass a vote of no confidence against the government, and money bills cannot be introduced in the RS. The Speaker presides over the LS, while the Vice President presides over the RS. Parliament is the highest law-making body. A proposal for a new law or a change in an old one is called a bill. To become an act, a bill has to be passed by both the houses and signed by the President. Bills are of 3 kinds: ordinary bills, money bills, and constitution amendment bills. Parliament also discusses the budget and the finance bill. It keeps a check on the executive and can impeach high officials. The President is the constitutional head of state, but he must act on the advice of the Council.
Parliament is the supreme law-making body. The state legislature's powers of making laws are limited. Any new law or any change in an old law must abide by the spirit of the Constitution. To become an act, a bill has to be passed by both the houses and signed by the President. There are 3 kinds of bills: ordinary bills, money bills, and constitution amendment bills. It is the people who make laws indirectly through their representatives. But they can also participate actively by bringing pressure on their representatives to make new laws or change old ones.
The Judiciary. The Judiciary punishes lawbreakers, interprets the Constitution, upholds the rights of the citizens, and settles disputes. The sources of law in a country are the Constitution, laws made by the Union and state legislatures, case law, and customary law. We have a unified judiciary with the Supreme Court at the apex. The high courts are the highest courts in the states. The district judges' court and sessions court are the highest courts in a district. The courts below the high court are called subordinate courts. The decision of a superior court is binding on a lower court, while appeals can be made from a lower to a higher court. Cases are of two types, civil and criminal. Civil cases involve disputes between two parties on matters such as property, inheritance, and divorce. Criminal cases are filed by the government against a person, people, accused of committing a crime. Subordinate courts are divided into civil and criminal courts. The Supreme Court is headed by the Chief Justice of India, who along with the other judges of the court is appointed by the President. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over disputes between two or more state governments and the union and state governments, and in cases related to the constitutional validity of laws. It also exercises appellate, supervisory, and advisory jurisdictions. It is a court of record.
The High Court is headed by a Chief Justice, who along with the other judges, is appointed by the President. There are 24 High Courts, some shared by two or more states.
A High Court has original jurisdiction in disputes related to elections in a state and cases related to fundamental rights. It also has appellate and supervisory jurisdictions. It is a court of record. Nyay Panchayats are village-level courts that do not come under the judiciary hierarchy. There can be no appeal against their decisions. A Lok Adalat is headed by a retired judge and settles disputes on the basis of mutual understanding and compromise. There can be no appeal against the decision of a Lok Adalat. A PIL can be filed in a High Court or the Supreme Court by any person or body acting in the interest of others or the society in general. Marginalisation and social justice. Groups or communities that have a low social status and are disincluded from the process of decision-making and deprived of the benefits of development are called marginalized. Adivasis or tribals, who are the most ancient inhabitants of our country, once had control over large areas of forest land. They started losing their land and means of livelihood in the British period, when wildlife sanctuaries, mines, industries, plantations, etc. came up on their lands. The process continues even today, often with the knowledge of the state governments. The scheduled castes were considered the lowest under the caste system. They were untouchables, barred from the rights enjoyed by others. According to Sanchar Committee report and some other studies, Muslims are also marginalized, their status being somewhere between the SCs, STs and the OBCs. Article 15 of the Constitution prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, religion, etc. Article 17 forbids the practice of untouchability. Yet, new laws have had to be made to secure the rights of the weaker sections because the weaker sections find it difficult to fight against centuries-old biases. The Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955 makes the practice of untouchability a punishable offence. The Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989 makes acts committed to humiliate members of these communities punishable under law. Depriving such people of their land and property is also punishable. The employment of manual scavengers and construction of dry latrines Prohibition Act was passed in 1993 to stop the practice of manual scavenging. The Scheduled Tribes and Other Forest Dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act 2005 allows forest dwellers some rights over forest lands and forest products. Under the government's reservation policy, 7.5% and 15% of seats and jobs are reserved for STs and SCs respectively. An additional 27% of seats are reserved for OBCs.
Public facilities.
Public facilities are services, institutions, etc. that are used by the people in general. Example, buses, roads, power supply and water supply.
There are some facilities, such as roads, which everyone needs but no one wants to provide since no profits can be made out of them. The government has to take the responsibility for providing these. It must also have the overall responsibility of providing certain basic facilities so that everyone can afford them and there is a fair distribution.
According to the Constitution and decision of courts, the right to life includes the rights to water, clean environment, food and livelihood. The right to education is a fundamental right for children in the age group of 6 to 14 years. Swajal Dhara, the Central Rural Sanitation Program, and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan are some measures taken by the government to provide universal access to water, sanitation, and elementary education. The money for funding public facilities comes from taxes and the price charged for services. Sometimes a special tax or cess is charged to meet the funds required for a special program or to deal with an emergency.
Economic activities and social justice.
Laws are needed to regulate economic activities so that people in a stronger position, such as employers and sellers, do not exploit those in a weaker position, such as workers and consumers. Some of these laws relate to specific groups, such as workers and consumers. Others are made to protect the public in general. The Minimum Wages Act fixes the minimum wage that a worker must be paid. The Factories Act lays down standards for the safety and welfare of workers. Other such laws are the Mines Act and the Dock Workers Act. The Trade Union Act recognizes the fundamental right of workers to form unions and sets out rules for forming such unions. The Industrial Disputes Act provides for the setting up of special courts to settle disputes between workers and employers. The Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act has been amended to make it illegal to employ children under 14 in any kind of job. The Consumers Protection Act lays down the rights of consumers and provides for the setting up of consumer courts to deal with the complaints of consumers. Before 1984, when the Bhopal gas tragedy occurred, laws on industrial safety and pollution were rather weak. Also, no one thought of the right to a clean environment as a fundamental right. The Environment Protection Act was passed in 1986. The Bhopal disaster occurred when a huge quantity of poisonous gas leaked out of a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide, an American company. Thousands were killed and disabled because the company had neglected safety measures to save money. The government sued the company on behalf of the victims but accepted a very small amount of compensation. the poor suffer more from violations of safety and pollution laws. This is true of poor countries as well, because the poor are willing to work in dangerous situations for low wages, having no alternative. The poor also suffer when industries are shut down or relocated and slums are demolished to clean up a city.